As we all know, stories document the world that surrounds us. Stories capture both culture and history, acting as records of human time. Thinking about our communities, our countries, and our families, we know intuitively that the stories we share in common reflect our values and remember our past. That being said, a narrative cannot be defined solely for its role in documentation. Narratives are also very valuable for their important social and political role as well. As I see it, there's a direct correlation between storytelling and power. Power shapes stories, and in return, stories shape power. Therefore, the stories we tell matter, and not just because they document our history. Yes, stories matter within life, but they also matter within politics, within societal context. If we listen to the stories around us, really listen, we realize that there is an ongoing dialogue between stories and established power dynamics. In Yuri Herrera's novel, Science Preceding the End of the World, we encounter a unique representation of the Mexico-United States border, one not commonly seen within contemporary society. By focalizing on the perspective of an undocumented Mexican migrant, Herrera gives insight to the hardship associated with crossing the border and furthermore establishing life beyond it. In doing so, his novel introduces its audience to a perspective that greatly contradicts the negative representation of migrants by the media. He humanizes that same story we have heard repeated over and over again by the radio, by newspapers, and by national TV. He addresses the evident misrepresentation of Mexican migrants. In arguably one of the most striking passages of the novel, Keanna writes, "We are to blame for this destruction, we who don't speak your tongue and who don't know how to keep quiet either. We who didn't come by boats, who dirty up your doorsteps with our dust, who break your barbed wire. We who came to take your jobs, who dream of wiping your shit, who long to work long hours. We who fill your shiny clean streets with the smell of food, who deliver your dope, who deserve to be chained by neck and feet. We who are happy to die for you, what else could we do? We, the ones who are waiting for who knows what. We the dark, the short, the greasy, the shifty, the fat, the anemic. We the barbarians." In this incredibly moving passage, Herrera articulates the discrimination experienced by Mexican migrants. Through words like blame, dirty, chained, and barbarians, Herrera paints a picture of unjust treatment that simply can't be denied. It is made apparent that Mexican migrants, like many other marginalized populations, have experienced social, economic, and political exclusion as a result of the unequal power relationships conveyed through narratives. This passage exemplifies how stories and stereotypes are propagated by the media and therefore establish power dynamics in favor of particular groups. At this point, I would like to introduce myself not just as a student or a sister or a friend. I would like to introduce myself as the daughter of two immigrants. My dad grew up in Randers, Denmark, and my mom is from Mexico City. Therefore, Herrera's novel resonated really deeply with me considering my personal heritage and my connection to this topic. For me, Herrera's novel addresses a topic far greater than just simple misconceptions. It addresses the role of dominant cultures in portraying other groups through a distorted filter. Now, we are all familiar with the dominant label of Mexican migrants as illegals. Just as Herrera uses his novel to put forth a new perspective, I would like to similarly offer new insights on this topic and try to dismantle some of the negative connotations associated with the words Mexican migration. I have gone ahead and asked two Mexicans for their input on the matter, asking them both the same question. What have you heard about Mexican migration, and do you agree or disagree? These were their responses.
La migración mexicana no es nueva, ha existido desde el siglo XIX, cuando Estados Unidos tomó la parte del sur, de lo que ahora es el sur de Estados Unidos, lo que era el norte de México, y entonces empezó a haber mucho movimiento entre las dos partes. Ha beneficiado a los dos países, pero ha tenido momentos de crisis. La migración mexicana tiene muchos aspectos positivos. Uno de ellos es definitivamente que permite enviar recursos desde el extranjero a México. También permite cubrir ciertas plazas o ciertos trabajos que no se desarrollan en Estados Unidos por las posiciones, no solamente en el campo, sino también en el área de servicios. En Estados Unidos se considera a veces que los mexicanos les van a quitar trabajo a los norteamericanos. La realidad es que pueden combinarse y que los mexicanos muchas veces a partir de la segunda generación se integran perfectamente a la sociedad de Estados Unidos.
Immigration. People from United States complain about people from Latin America that immigrate to the States. People from Europe complain about African people coming into Europe and people from Middle East. The truth is that my experience as an immigrant has been really good. When I moved to Canada, I was able to take few courses about how the country and how the culture, which things were right to do and which things were wrong. And I also was able to take an English class. I just can say it has been very positive. In all my jobs, I have never felt an outsider. I always think they try, like it's very nice to live in a country where there is people from all over the world, like there is people from Asia, from Middle East, from Africa, and everybody works together to make society better.
Both Carlos and Elizabeth share two very different perspectives about Mexican migration than what we normally hear in the media. By sharing their stories, I'm adding to the collection of narratives about Mexican migration and hopefully expanding our understanding of what it means to cross the border, and not just the Mexico-United States border. The capacity of narratives to amplify particular power dynamics is one that transcends just Mexico. It is relevant to any of the groups that have had their stories told through the words of others. By sharing this new perspective, I hope I can share some of the stories that we don't get to hear very often. I hope I can raise awareness surrounding the role of narratives in establishing and fortifying power dynamics. In Aditya's TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, we are introduced to a similar topic as she discusses the detrimental impact of reducing people and places which are fundamentally complex in nature to single stories. She draws a parallel between these one-sided narratives and stereotypes, suggesting that they are built on a lack of knowledge and therefore present a fragmented and incomplete version of the truth. On a personal level, this creates a disconnect between individuals. However, within the greater scope of society, Aditya concludes that these single stories establish harmful power dynamics surrounding particular groups and settings. In her TED Talk, Aditya shares a variety of personal anecdotes to support her arguments, effectively breathing life into the central message of the speech. For example, Aditya opens her speech with an inviting tone, recounting how exposure to British literature at an early age prompted the European lifestyle to be reflected in her writing. This memory demonstrates the impact of single stories on an individual's understanding of the world, as well as the consequences that result from a lack of diverse perspectives shared in the media. Single stories allow for the dominance of a particular set of ideas and beliefs, which ultimately affects our perception of the world. Aditya delivers an incredibly moving speech, discussing a culturally relevant subject with broad implications in modern society. Her TED Talk serves as a basis for a greater discussion on stereotypes and prejudice, as she concludes that single stories create distorted and even harmful generalizations about particular groups. At its core, her speech advocates for the rejection of single stories in an effort to combat some of those negative views associated with stereotypes. Personally, I agree with Aditya as I believe that as humans, we are more than just a single story. We are a set of experiences, a product of the places we have been and the people we have met. As the daughter of two immigrants from vastly different countries, I consider myself to be sort of like a mixture of cultures, so I couldn't possibly identify myself as one or the other. With that in mind, I would like to share with you a bit of my heritage, a few pieces of my family, my friends, and my experiences. Surrounded by my friends and family, I have been fortunate enough to travel to both Mexico and Denmark. I have learned so much through my experiences there as I have received the opportunity to explore new places, meet new people, and immerse myself in cultures different from my own. Each new experience has connected me with alternate narratives, which have expanded my outlook on the world and promoted a mindset of growth. Every new encounter is a new story, another addition to a growing collection of experiences. In my case, I am Mexican and I am Danish, but I am also Canadian too. In describing myself, I can't limit myself to just one label. And that applies to all of us. We can't be defined by just one narrative. That's why it's so important to ensure we are not limited by single stories that do not truly reflect our complex nature. Many voices, most of our 7.5 billion voices, are seldom ever expressed. Dominant voices always shape the key stories of our time, often at the expense of others. In narrative theory, George Grinnell examines the role of narratives in perception. He states, if narratives represent reality, and inevitably do so partially, they can shape how one perceives reality. We can observe this in the representation of Mexicans in the media and the distribution of single stories. They shape how we perceive reality, and as Grinnell writes, they impose a particular vision of reality upon the world. Nevertheless, just as important as it is to recognize the influence of power, we must also recognize the role of narratives in shaping that power. While the stories we hear are often subject to external forces, they have the same ability to shape and dismantle those power dynamics that have become firmly entrenched within society. By putting forth new ideas, by making us aware of the distribution of authority, and by rejecting single stories, narratives can shape power relationships. As we've seen in Herrera's novel, in Adichie's speech, and the perspectives I have shared, narratives put forth new ideas that address the misconceptions conveyed by the media. As consumers of narratives, it is our responsibility to be aware of the power our stories hold and try to spread diverse perspectives. In doing so, we can help empower others and facilitate the establishment of a more inclusive society.